I've always found solace in the quiet of the woods, just me, nature, and miles of silence. That's why, one early morning, I loaded my gear into the car for a weekend of camping and hunting, eager to escape the noise of everyday life. The trail parking lot was empty, the air crisp and still, promising a peaceful trip. By midday, I'd set up camp near a babbling creek, pitched my tent, and kindled a small fire. I took my rifle and ventured deeper into the forest, following a faint path that soon vanished beneath layers of fallen leaves. As sunlight filtered through the trees, I spotted movement, a shadow slipping swiftly between the trunks. My breath caught. From a distance, it looked like another hunter, but the way he moved was off. He weaved through dense brush, never once stepping onto a trail, almost like he was avoiding being seen. I hesitated, my fingers tightening on my rifle. Part of me wanted to call out, to break the eerie silence, but something held me back, an instinctual warning I couldn't ignore. Hours passed with no game in sight, and with the sun dipping low, I decided to head back. But the woods were unnaturally quiet, no wind, no rustling leaves, just oppressive silence. That night, I barely managed to eat, nerves still raw from earlier. I forced myself into my tent, convincing myself it was just paranoia. Then, in the dead of night, I was jerked awake by a crack, sharp and unmistakable. A gunshot. Then another. My pulse thundered in my ears. Hunting was restricted to daylight hours, so who was out there, shooting in the dark? Before I could steady my breathing, soft footsteps crunched just outside my tent, followed by hushed voices. My blood ran cold. Through the canvas, I heard a whisper. "Should we check inside?" Panic rooted me in place, every muscle locked. After a few agonizing moments, one of them muttered, "Not now. Let's go." The footsteps faded, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I waited, heart pounding, until I was sure they were gone. Moving cautiously, I gathered my essentials and slipped out, each step towards my car a nightmare of snapping twigs and imagined eyes watching from the dark. I didn't stop driving until I saw a neon motel sign flickering through the trees, promising vacancy and, more importantly, people. The woman at the front desk barely looked up from her phone, sliding me a key without a word. Inside, the room was musty, the carpet stained, but at least I wasn't alone in the dark woods. I double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, until I heard a faint tap at the window. My breath hitched. In the dim light, I could make out a silhouette, tall and unmoving. Then came a knock at the door, slow and deliberate. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. A man's voice called through the wood, calm and polite. "I need to talk to you about the forest incident." Forest incident? There was no way this was a coincidence. With shaking hands, I slid the chain lock into place and called the police, stammering something about a strange man and gunshots. The dispatcher promised officers were on the way, urging me to stay inside. Minutes passed like hours, the silence heavier than before. When the police finally arrived, they found no one. The motel's security cameras were out of order, leaving me with nothing but my word and a gut-churning dread. I checked out at first light, driving without a destination, desperate to leave that night behind. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching, waiting. Working at a small marketing firm in San Diego wasn't exactly thrilling, but it paid the bills. My boss, Trent, was the kind of guy who pinched every penny and dismissed concerns with a curt, "Figure it out." So, when he sent me to a conference in Phoenix on a shoestring budget, I couldn't really refuse. The money he provided was barely enough for gas and a few cheap meals, let alone a decent hotel. That's how I ended up at the Westridge Motel, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed like a fly and the parking lot was littered with broken bottles. The front desk clerk barely looked up from his phone as he handed me the key, eyes dull with boredom. My room was just as bad, stained carpet, mismatched furniture, and a flickering lamp casting weak shadows. I dropped my suitcase, trying to ignore the musty smell that clung to everything. It was only for a few nights, I told myself. The thing is, I'd been feeling uneasy for weeks, like someone was watching me. It started small, a figure in a dark hoodie lingering in my peripheral vision, glimpses at the grocery store, near my apartment, even outside my office. At first, I dismissed it as stress or coincidence. After all, it was a city, plenty of people wore hoodies. But it kept happening. Same height, same stance, same dark hoodie. That unease followed me all the way to Phoenix. I spotted that hoodie outside a gas station off the freeway, just for a moment, but enough to send my stomach plummeting. I convinced myself it was paranoia until I left the conference center late one night. The parking lot was nearly empty, just rows of darkened cars, but then I saw it, a figure in a hoodie, leaning against a wall. They stepped back into the shadows the moment I looked over. Heart pounding, I hurried back to the motel, locking the door and sliding the flimsy chain latch in place. I turned on the TV, hoping for some background noise to drown out the silence. But every sound made me flinch, the hum of the air conditioner, the creak of the walls. Hours passed with my eyes fixed on the door, exhaustion weighing heavy. Around 2 a.m., a soft knock shattered the quiet. My breath hitched. I hesitated, then peeked through the peephole. My blood ran cold. The hooded figure stood right outside, head down, hands hidden. Before I could react, the door rattled violently as they slammed into it, chain latch straining with each impact. I threw my weight against the door, heart hammering, shouting for them to leave. The assault stopped abruptly, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I scrambled for my phone, fingers trembling, and called the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm, asking questions I barely processed. Minutes stretched painfully until the police finally arrived, finding no one outside. They searched the lot, checked the security cameras, only to discover the system was ancient and broken. I was left with nothing but my word and a knot of terror lodged deep in my chest. After the officers left, I sat on the bed, eyes fixed on the door until dawn crept in through the thin curtains. I checked out the moment the sun rose, too afraid to stay a second longer. Even now, back home, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that dark hoodie lurking just out of sight. It was late, and exhaustion pulled at me with every mile of dark highway. I'd spent the past 10 hours behind the wheel, halfway home after visiting my parents for the holidays. The ache in my shoulders was a constant throb, and my eyes burned from staring at the road. When I saw the neon sign of a motel flickering through the trees, I didn't think twice. I pulled in, the tires crunching over gravel, relieved just to stop. The lobby was dim and empty except for a young man behind the desk, early 20s at most, with greasy hair and a nervous energy that set my teeth on edge. His name tag read Jeff, the plastic corners cracked and worn. He avoided my eyes, fingers twitching as he typed my info into the ancient computer. I paid in cash, not wanting the hassle of arguing with him about their card machine, which had a handwritten, "Out of order," sign taped over it. My room was even worse than I expected, stiff sheets, a sagging bed, and a single lamp that flickered like it was on its last breath. I tossed my bag onto the chair, locked the door, and drew the curtains tight. All I wanted was to pass out and leave at first light. But sleep didn't come. The silence was too heavy, broken only by distant cars on the highway and the occasional creak of the walls. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pausing right outside my door. My heart thudded painfully. I strained to listen, barely daring to breathe. The knob rattled softly, metal clicking as if someone was testing the lock. I swallowed hard, creeping to the door and peering through the peephole. Jeff. The same guy from the front desk. But his posture was all wrong, hunched, tense, a glint of metal in his hand. My breath hitched. He was holding a thin tool, something that gleamed under the hallway light. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then the lock clicked, and the door creaked open an inch, stopped only by the security chain. Panic surged. I threw my shoulder against the door, slamming it shut with all my weight. Jeff snarled, shoving back, and the door rattled violently. My mind raced, every nerve screaming. The door burst open with a crack, the chain snapping, and he was inside, knife glinting, eyes wild and unfocused. The struggle was desperate and brutal. I grabbed a lamp, swinging blindly, the cord tangling around my wrist. He lunged, blade slashing, missing my side by inches. We crashed into the dresser, drawers spilling out. In the chaos, I grabbed the knife, slick with sweat, and slashed blindly. The blade bit into his arm, and he screamed, stumbling back, blood seeping through his sleeve. He bolted, crashing through the door, leaving a dark trail behind him. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped my phone as I called 911, words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline, telling me to lock the door and wait. Sirens wailed through the night, and police found Jeff slumped against a tree behind the motel, blood staining his clothes. They took him away in cuffs, mumbling about money and debts, eyes glassy with fear. I gave my statement in a daze, fingers still trembling, the knife's weight lingering in my hand. I left the motel as dawn broke, the sky pale and cold, my rearview mirror empty but my pulse still racing. Even now, I can't shake the memory of Jeff's eyes, wild, desperate, and all too human.